All right, welcome back to Self-Publishing Made Easy. I hope you've had a chance to look at episode 1 where we talk about writing tools. Today we are talking about editing. It's a big topic and everybody has an opinion. The basic truth is that you are going to need editing of some type. You cannot edit your own work. You may be even an editor, a professional editor hires someone else to edit their own writing. Why? Because when you write something, your brain knows what it should have or wanted to write. So when you read it back to you, your brain automatically corrects the text to what it should be. And so you miss things, you don't see them. I still do a lot of self-editing before I send it to my editor, but you need to send it, you need to have someone else, not just a friend or a family member. They may catch a few things, but an actual editor. That can be a large cost, especially if you have a long book. So probably one of the biggest costs to self-publishing is hiring that editor. So it's important to find one that you like, find someone who works well with you, find someone where your workflow and their workflow match. If you watched episode 1 or lesson 1, you know that I work in Google Docs and my editor does as well, so we can collaborate on the editing and it gets done quicker. You just need to find the right person. There's a lot of ways to find them. The websites, Facebook pages, the gig sites like Fiverr or Upworks, you can find editors. Have them do a sample to see if you're a good fit. Before you hire someone to do your entire work, it might be smart to have them do a little sample first. So today we're going to talk about the different types of editing. You may need all of them. You may only need a few of them. Kind of depends on where you're at as a writer. It depends on your skill level. It depends on your writing style and your strengths and weaknesses. So let's talk through them, and that will help you determine what it is you need to look for. All right, so remember to subscribe and click that notification bell before we jump into it, and let's get going. Okay, so we said you need to get your book edited. What does that mean? What types of edits are there, and which ones do you need to use? Do you have to use all of them, or can you only use some of them? Some of them kind of bleed together. So let's walk through these different types of edits, what they are. And a basic rule of thumb is they start from the 35,000 foot level, from way up here, looking at the broad product. And then as we get further down the list, we get further focused until we are in the weeds of actual words and periods and commas. So the developmental edit is just that overarching view of your work. So you've vomited a story onto paper, you've typed out your story, and that's the best thing that you can do. Instead of trying to edit and perfect it as you go, especially if you're still developing your process, just write the story. And then if you are unsure of whether it's any good, if it makes sense, if there are problems, right? Because this is your baby, so you're biased. So you can send it to a developmental editor and they will look at it from the big picture. Do you have an actual coherent story there? Does it make sense? Is there a plot? Does the plot make sense? Are there massive holes? Or is the style work? Or are you trying to mix a bunch of different styles and all that kind of thing? Just that big picture, is this interesting? Does it flow? Does it work? I do developmental edits, and I read one recently where it was a great decision for him to hire a developmental editor because he basically had two types of books, two genres in one book, and he needed to either separate them and write two books, or he needed to meld those together so that it was one cohesive genre. Otherwise, the book didn't have an identity, and a developmental edit will help you find your book's identity. So next is an evaluation or structural edit, and it's very similar to a developmental edit. They're basically assessing flow and completeness and kind of the overall quality, which sounds similar, doesn't it? It's just a little bit further down in that focus area. They'll kind of mark it up at a high level, maybe send you a memo. For developmental edits, that's what I do, is I create a memo or a report after that goes through plot, characters, holes, that kind of thing. Evaluation edit might do the same thing. if you do get a developmental edit, you probably want to follow up with an evaluation edit to make sure that you fixed all of the mistakes that were found or that were brought up in the developmental process. So once that's done, it goes to content editing, right? So content editing is a little bit further down. Now we're looking at paragraph structure and tense. Are you jumping between first person and third person? Are you jumping between present tense and past tense or future tense if that's what you're writing? So that's going to walk through that. So basically look at that as more we're getting into the paragraph. Do the paragraphs flow together? Do your sections flow together? Does it make sense that how you separate your chapters out, jumping from one chapter to another? Is it logical, your chapter breaks? Sometimes a chapter break is based on character, sometimes it's based on location, sometimes it's based on time, sometimes it's just based on an event. Do yours make sense? Sometimes you may need to move a chapter from here and put it a few earlier and rearrange them because to help with the flow of your story. So it's not as detailed as a line edit, but we're starting to get down into like the actual pages and paragraphs. And then line, we're getting into your sentence structure. Do your sentences flow? Are you using kind of the same words and phrases over and over again? Are you falling into ruts where you're using slang or phrasing or things that don't quite work together? So the line editor starts looking at that kind of thing. Is it structured properly? So they're getting more and more into the weeds of, does each sentence flow into the next sentence? And are you making your paragraph breaks at the right place? That kind of thing. And then we get into copy editing, which is way down into the weeds. Now we're talking about grammar, we're talking about spelling, we're talking about punctuation, and we're talking about commas and semicolons and all those, the little teeny details where they're reading word by word, line by line. Then proofreading is once all of your editing is done and your formatting is done and you've put together basically the product you want to send to the publisher. Proofreading is looking through that to make sure there aren't any mistakes. Your pagination, is it proper? Your chapter breaks, your headers, does everything look good so that when it goes to the printer, it's going to print properly? That's your proofreading. So a lot of times you can actually purchase a proof of your book before you publish it so you can do the proofread. So those are our lines of editing. So for me, I'm at a point where I don't use a developmental editor or the evaluation or content. I send it to my editor to do copy and line. And then if there is content, he'll comment on that as well. But he's mostly focused on the line editing and the copy editing. So you can combine those, but what you need to make sure you do is when you hire an editor, you need to know what you're hiring them for, make sure that it's clear between the two of you, and that your editor knows what you expect, what you're looking for, and can price the work appropriately. Talk about pricing for a second. There are standards. There's an editing association that kind of sets the standard prices for editing. It's generally per word. For example, 3 cents per word for this or 4 cents per word for this type. So there are standards that most people use. Some are higher than that based on their experience. Some are lower than that because they're trying to break into the field or they're trying to give a discount. And it's a marketplace. So it's the competition of the marketplace. So but you shouldn't just look for price. You should look for someone who fits with your workflow and can work within the time frame. Just make sure you're very clear how many re-edits you get, how many revisions you get, the time frame you expect the editing work to be done within, the price that you expect to pay. Make sure all of that is in your contract up front, whether you do it through a gig site like Upworks or Fiverr, or you find someone online through Facebook or a website. Wherever you find the person, make sure your expectations are clear, and so you know exactly what you're expecting, they know what you're expecting, and you know what you are getting. Because it wouldn't be good if you just said, hey, I want you to edit, and you get an evaluation edit back and you were expecting copy editing, and now you have to pay for another line of copy editing. because it can add up. So that's a rough lowdown on editing. So when people say you need to get your book edited, these are your options. And you have to make the decision of what options you need. I would just recommend that as you start out, start high, start at that high level, work your way down until you are comfortable with the finished product and you know exactly where you need editing help. Okay, research. There's no excuse for not doing your research. As you're writing a book, if you're writing about a subject and you're not quite sure, look it up. You don't have to go to a library anymore. You don't have to look it up in an encyclopedia. You can just Google it. So do it. It's amazing to me the inaccuracies I find in books that could have been fixed with a simple Google search. Do not skip that step because you can ruin it for someone. So my career was in law enforcement, so I can be very picky about books that have law enforcement scenes, police procedurals, thrillers, that kind of thing, because I find a lot of authors think that they know what to write and what they're talking about because they've watched cop shows on TV. Well, I hate to break it to you, but most cop shows on TV are very inaccurate, and you can get away with it in a 45-minute TV drama. You cannot get away with it in a book because there's no excuse in a book. For example, I recently read an supposed FBI thriller. In part of the book, she talked about the FBI Academy. I've been through a federal law enforcement academy. I know what's taught there. She had it all wrong. So I did a little exercise. I said, how difficult would it have been for her to find the information? I did a simple Google search about the FBI Academy. The second search down was an official document from the Academy that answered all of the things that she got wrong were right there in one PDF document. So with one simple search, she could have changed the book from almost unreadable to excellent. But she just was too lazy to do the work. She just assumed she knew what she was talking about because she saw them on TV shows, or I don't know where she thought she got her knowledge from, but it was completely wrong. And a simple search would have fixed that. Do your research. If you're writing about a location where you've never been and you don't have the opportunity to go there, get on Google Earth, get on Street View, get on Maps, look on their website, look up pictures that people have posted and tagged for that city or location. Walk the streets virtually. Do whatever you have to do in order to be able to describe it accurately. Because odds are someone from that location is going to read your book and say, that's not what our city looks like, or that's not what it's like here. And yes, you have license as a fiction author to make some stuff up, and that's fine. But your fiction needs to fit in the real world. It needs to be believable. And a developmental editor is not going to do the research for you, but that's kind of one thing they look at. Is this believable? Even in a world of magic and a fantasy, the world you create still has to be believable within the confines of that world. So do your research. There are days when I hardly get any words on the page because I go down rabbit holes of researching what I want to write. And there have been times where I wrote something and then I researched it and realized I was completely wrong. There have been times where I went to the location after I wrote the book and I ended up having to go back and change it because what I saw online was very different from reality. So even Street View isn't perfect. Going there in person is the best possible scenario, but that's not always feasible. Do the best you can and do your research. And that's all part of crafting your story and creating a story that's interesting and readable is one that is believable and accurate and that doesn't have mistakes. Something I'll harp on a lot, I talked about it in lesson 1, is you don't want anything to take your reader out of the story. Misspellings, grammatical mistakes, unbelievable situations, all take them out of the story because they're going, wait a minute, what? And they're no longer flowing through the story. That's your key. Does this take my reader out of the story? Okay, so editing and research, very important steps. Editing can probably be the most expensive step in the self-publishing process. Editing and audiobooks, that's a much later lesson, but it is necessary. So find the one that fits in your budget and works within your workflow. and you will have a much better product. Your product will stand out, and people will know that you did the work to create a good book. All right, so that's lesson 2. Make sure you subscribe and you hit the notification bell. If you haven't watched lesson 1 yet, it's about the tools you can use for writing. So if you're interested in that, go back and watch lesson 1. And I will see you for lesson 3 on self-publishing made easy.